The story begins with one of the most exclusive hypercars in the world, the Bugatti Chiron. On the surface, it appears to be a car built in a league of its own, an example of mechanical perfection, bespoke engineering, and untouchable craftsmanship. Bugatti's official narrative has always emphasized exclusivity and the uniqueness of its parts, claiming that the Chiron components are unlike anything else in the automotive world. According to the company, even something as standard as an airbag is so specialized that only Bugatti-trained technicians can handle it safely. However, the reality is much more revealing and far more complicated than the glossy image projected to the public. On the very day that the Bugatti CEO made this statement, Mat Armstrong, a YouTuber known for documenting extreme automotive rebuilds, discovered something extraordinary. He pulled the official part numbers of the Chiron's airbags and, to everyone's surprise, found identical parts being used in a completely different car, an Audi A3. This was not a similar part, a compatible alternative, or an aftermarket version. It was the exact same airbag from the same supplier with the same specifications, only sold under a different box and at a drastically lower price. What this revealed was not just a single oversight. It revealed a carefully constructed system designed to manipulate perception, control access, and maximize profit. The revelation was shocking because it exposed how Bugatti was creating artificial exclusivity, a strategy that had convinced customers to believe that what they were buying was impossibly rare, unique, and impossible to replicate. The implications went far beyond one airbag or one Chiron. They suggested that the company's entire pricing and part strategy was built on the idea that control and scarcity were more important than transparency, fairness, or even the actual mechanical uniqueness of car. This initial discovery set the stage for a deeper investigation, one that Mat Armstrong and FXG, a professional automotive group, would carry out publicly and meticulously, documenting every step on YouTube, leaving no bolt unturned, and exposing the system that Bugatti hoped would remain invisible. By showing viewers exactly what was happening, Armstrong challenged not just a single manufacturer, but an entire mindset in the hypercar industry, where customers are trained to equate complexity with impossibility and impossibility with ultimate value. In doing so, Armstrong revealed that exclusivity, carefully sold as craftsmanship, was in fact a mechanism for control and profit, and that customers were paying enormous sums not for unparalleled engineering, but for the perception of rarity and untouchability. The next chapter of the story involves the actual rebuild of the crashed Bugatti Chiron, a project undertaken by FXG in collaboration with Mat Armstrong. FXG had purchased a wrecked Chiron legally at an auction, paying for the vehicle with full ownership rights. There were no hidden conditions, no backdoor agreements with Bugatti, and no ongoing obligations to the manufacturer. Everything they did was fully legitimate under both U.S. and EU law. The rebuild was public, streamed and documented on YouTube for all to see. Every step of the process, every bolt removed or replaced, and every problem encountered was shown in real time. However, the rebuild soon met significant resistance, though not from FXG or Armstrong directly, but from Bugatti's supply chain. The company did not immediately take legal action, nor did they issue court orders. Instead, they quietly contacted suppliers, and those suppliers stopped sending critical parts necessary to complete the rebuild. This method of obstruction was subtle, almost invisible. There were no lawsuits, no official documentation, and no public statements at the time, just phone calls behind the scenes that effectively blocked the rebuild. Bugatti claimed the move was for safety, citing reasons such as Chiron-specific airbags, unverified structural integrity without factory equipment, and the impossibility of ensuring proper repairs outside their controlled environment. But while the claims sounded reasonable on paper, they raise a critical question. If the Chiron was truly unsafe, why did Bugatti not exercise the simplest solution? Why did they not buy the car back outright from the auction or FXG and prevent any risk? Instead, they left the car with its legal owner, effectively guaranteeing the problem could only be suppressed by controlling access to parts. This was not about safety. It was about reputation, control, and the illusion of exclusivity. By monitoring the rebuild without taking ownership, Bugatti was attempting to manage a narrative in which the Chiron appeared untouchable, unique, and impossible to repair, while in reality, the same components existed across other vehicles in the Volkswagen Group, often at a fraction of the cost. This approach revealed a systematic strategy where pricing, scarcity, and perceived difficulty were used to protect the perceived value of the Chiron, ensuring that the multi-million-dollar price tag remained justified in the eyes of buyers, while also discouraging independent repairs or transparency. Mat Armstrong's investigation quickly uncovered a pattern of parts sharing that went far beyond airbags. Electronics, control units, sensors, window motors, and even interior switches were found to be sourced from other vehicles across the Volkswagen Group, including Audi, Porsche, and Volkswagen models costing a fraction of the Chiron. For example, headlights at Bugatti priced at $8,500 were identical to a version used in a Volkswagen Touareg sold for approximately $340. Airbag modules priced at $12,000 by Bugatti could be found in an Audi A3 for under $900. The hardware itself, the supplier, and the specifications were identical. The only difference was the branding, packaging, and price. This revelation was significant because it challenged the fundamental narrative of Bugatti's exclusivity. Customers have been told that Chiron parts were one-of-a-kind, bespoke, and hand-built. In reality, the parts were rebadged from existing components, marked up significantly, and presented as exclusive. Armstrong did not go looking for a scandal. He merely verified part numbers and specifications, allowing the evidence to tell the story. Each discovery reinforced the same message. Bugatti was not manufacturing all components uniquely from scratch. Instead, the company leveraged scarcity and controlled access to maintain the car's mystique, driving value through perception rather than mechanical uniqueness. These findings had far-reaching implications. If a rebuild could be completed with readily available parts, then the notion of a Chiron as an untouchable, irreplaceable masterpiece began to crumble. Armstrong's transparency, showing each discovery publicly, meant that the narrative Bugatti had relied upon for years was now being challenged on a global stage. With millions of viewers watching every update, the company's control over perception of rarity was fading. This situation highlighted a key tension in the luxury and hypercar markets: the balance between engineering innovation, branding, and perceived value. Armstrong's methodical exposure to the system demonstrated that control and exclusivity could be manufactured artificially, and that consumers could be misled about the true nature of the product they purchase, raising questions not only about Bugatti, but about the ethics of hyperluxury marketing. As a whole, as the rebuild progressed, Mat Armstrong and FXG encountered a new challenge, one that revealed how far Bugatti was willing to go to control the narrative surrounding the Chiron. The company did not sue, issue legal threats, or make public accusations. Instead, they leveraged the quiet but powerful influence they held over their suppliers. Without warning, essential components stopped arriving. Parts that were legally purchased, paid for, and documented simply became unavailable. The suppliers, many of whom were part of the Volkswagen Group ecosystem or relied on the company for priority access, complied without question. This was a strategic move designed to choke the rebuild silently. It was subtle, almost invisible, a blockade executed behind the scenes rather than in courtrooms or press releases. While the official story claimed this was a matter of safety, citing concerns such as a Chiron structural integrity, specialized airbags, and the potential hazards of repairs performed outside Bugatti's facilities, the facts told a different story. Armstrong had already documented everything, showing that the components were not only identical to other VW Group parts, but could be safely installed with proper expertise. This revealed a fundamental truth about Bugatti's approach. The strategy was less about protecting customers and more about protecting reputation and control. By stopping the rebuild through supply chain influence rather than legal channels, Bugatti attempted to maintain the illusion of exclusivity and the perception that these vehicles were untouchable. The tactic was effective in theory because it operated quietly, without attracting attention from the media or the public. However, Armstrong's transparency turned that strategy upside down. Every missing component, every delayed shipment, and every workaround was documented and shared with millions of viewers. The public could see the blockade in real time, which shifted the power dynamics. What was intended to suppress a single rebuild became a story about accountability, transparency, and consumer rights. It also highlighted a broader issue within the automotive world. Even the most prestigious manufacturers rely on controlling access to parts, information, and perception to maintain high prices and brand exclusivity. For the hyper-luxury segment, this was a lesson in the delicate balance between engineering innovation, supply chain leverage, and consumer trust. Armstrong's methodical documentation ensured that Bugatti's behind-the-scenes influence could no longer operate in silence. The rebuild became not only a technical project but a public investigation, exposing the reality of how even a company like Bugatti, known for engineering excellence and luxury, depends on manufactured scarcity and controlled access to maintain its image and profit margins. This episode illustrated that influence and control in the automotive world are often exercised quietly, through relationships, supply chains, and indirect pressure, rather than through public legal battles, a tactic that is less visible but no less powerful. One of the most striking revelations from Armstrong's investigation was how Bugatti created the illusion of exclusivity. Customers had long believed that every component of a Chiron was designed and built uniquely for that model. Bugatti reinforced this belief through marketing, official statements, and carefully controlled access to parts. The narrative was simple. The Chiron is handcrafted, complex, and untouchable, with components that cannot be replicated elsewhere. This story justified the multi-million-dollar price tag and cemented the vehicle's status as a hypercar beyond comparison. Yet, when Mat Armstrong began cross-referencing part numbers, a different reality emerged. Many components, from airbags and control modules to interior switches and sensors, were already in production for other vehicles in the Volkswagen Group, including Audi, Porsche, and Volkswagen models that cost a fraction of the Chiron. Airbags from an Audi A3, headlights from a Volkswagen Touareg, and electronic modules from Porsche all shared identical specifications with their Chiron counterparts. What differentiated Bugatti's parts was not their engineering, but their branding and price markup. Some components were marked up 20-fold or more, creating a perception of scarcity where none existed. Armstrong's findings revealed a systematic pattern. The Chiron's exclusivity was often an illusion, maintained through controlled access, high pricing, and a narrative that suggested uniqueness rather than evidence. This tactic is not unique to Bugatti. Many luxury brands rebadge or adapt existing components. However, in the Chiron's case, the scale of the markup and the aggressive control over supply created a disconnect between reality and perception. By documenting the parts and their origins, Armstrong shattered the myth that Bugatti's vehicles were untouchable machines built entirely from bespoke components. He showed that these hypercars, while undoubtedly complex and technically sophisticated, shared much more with other vehicles than most people realized. The exposure of this practice forced the public to question not only Bugatti's narrative, but also the principles of luxury marketing in the automotive sector. It demonstrated how scarcity and exclusivity could be artificially manufactured to maintain brand value, an approach that prioritizes perception over transparency. Armstrong's rebuild thus became more than a mechanical project. It became a lens through which consumers could see the realities behind the world of hypercars, the influence of branding, and the ways in which perception could be engineered, sometimes at enormous cost to the buyer. This revelation resonated beyond just the Chiron, prompting broader discussions about the nature of ownership, the ethics of luxury pricing, and the right to repair vehicles legally purchased by their owners. The story of Mat Armstrong's Chiron rebuild took an unexpected turn when Mansory, one of the world's most renowned aftermarket hypercar specialists, became involved. Mansory has built a reputation for engineering extreme vehicles, creating customizations and performance upgrades that challenge even the original manufacturer's capabilities. Unlike Bugatti, which relies heavily on controlling access to parts and influence over suppliers, Mansory possesses its own supply chains, manufacturing resources, and engineering expertise. This made them a critical ally in the rebuild, as their involvement meant that Bugatti's attempt to block progress through supplier leverage could no longer succeed. Where Bugatti could pressure Volkswagen Group suppliers, Mansory's independence rendered those tactics ineffective. This shift changed the stakes entirely. The rebuild was no longer just about proving the Chiron could be restored. It was about demonstrating that independent specialists could challenge the narrative of exclusivity and control that had long defined the hypercar market. The implications were enormous. If Armstrong and Mansory could complete the rebuild successfully, it would serve as a precedent that even a car as prestigious and seemingly untouchable as a Bugatti Chiron could be repaired, modified, and restored without relying on the manufacturer. This challenged not just Bugatti's authority, but a broader industry practice where high-end manufacturers enforce artificial scarcity and use pricing to maintain their perception of rarity. Mansouri's involvement also underscored the importance of transparency and documentation. Every step of the rebuild was meticulously recorded, shared online, and analyzed by viewers worldwide. This public scrutiny ensured that no aspect of the rebuild could be hidden or misrepresented. It forced the industry to confront the reality that modern hypercars, despite their complex engineering and high price tags, are fundamentally machines that can be repaired, rebuilt, and understood, provided the expertise and willingness exists to do so. Beyond the technical implications, this development had a psychological impact. Collectors and enthusiasts who had believed that the Chiron was unrepairable now began to reconsider the value of their cars. The rebuild demonstrated that the so-called untouchability of the Chiron was, in many ways, a narrative designed to protect the perceived value and control over the aftermarket. This challenged long-held assumptions about hypercar ownership, raising questions about the ethics of artificial scarcity, branding, and control in an industry that often equates difficulty with exclusivity. The combination of Armstrong's transparency and Mansouri's technical capabilities represented a significant cultural shift in the automotive world, showing that even the most revered brands are not beyond scrutiny, and that owners have rights and resources to reclaim control over the vehicles they legally purchase. At the heart of the Chiron rebuild controversy lies a fundamental question. What does ownership truly mean when it comes to high-end vehicles? Mat Armstrong's experience highlights the tension between the legal rights of owners and the control exerted by manufacturers. FXG legally purchased a Chiron at auction, which meant they had full ownership under both U.S. and EU law. They were entitled to repair, modify, or display the car as they wished. However, Bugatti's actions demonstrated how corporate influence could effectively undermine those rights without engaging the legal system directly. By blocking suppliers and leveraging relationships, Bugatti attempted to suppress the rebuild quietly, creating a de facto monopoly on repair and maintenance. This situation exemplifies broader discussions around right-to-repair laws, which aim to ensure that consumers can maintain and repair their property without being dependent on manufacturers. In the hypercar industry, this is especially relevant because manufacturers have traditionally controlled access to parts, diagnostics, and repair procedures. By exposing that Chiron parts were largely sourced from other vehicles in the Volkswagen Group, Armstrong demonstrated that independent repairs are not only feasible, but often straightforward with proper documentation and expertise. This challenges the notion that manufacturers must be the sole gatekeepers of maintenance, and provides a tangible example for legislators, consumer advocates, and enthusiasts to argue for broader right-to-repair protections. The implications extend beyond a single car or brand. If owners of high-end vehicles can successfully reclaim repair rights, this could democratize access to maintenance and reduce the monopolistic control of luxury automakers over post-sale services. For consumers, this means more freedom, potentially lower repair costs, and the ability to preserve the value of their vehicles without being forced into expensive manufacturer-controlled service ecosystems. For manufacturers, it may require rethinking how exclusivity and scarcity are presented, balancing brand prestige with legal and ethical obligations to customers. Armstrong's documentation of the Chiron rebuild serves as a reference case, proving that these rights are actionable and that the narrative of untouchability can be challenged effectively through transparency, expertise, and public scrutiny. Another critical revelation from Armstrong's work was the extent to which Bugatti inflated part prices, creating a perception of scarcity that justified the Chiron's multi-million-dollar cost. Components such as headlights, airbag modules, interior switches, and control units were priced 20 times higher than their counterparts in other Volkswagen Group vehicles, despite sharing identical specifications and hardware. For example, a headlight marked at $8,500 in a Chiron was virtually identical to a Volkswagen Touareg part costing approximately $340. Airbag modules, listed at $12,000 by Bugatti, were available in an Audi A3 for less than $900. These markups reveal that exclusivity and complexity were being used strategically to protect the brand's high price point, rather than reflecting actual manufacturing costs or engineering challenges. Armstrong's findings highlighted a fundamental tension between perceived value and real-world functionality. Customers were being sold not only a car, but the idea that every component was unique, bespoke, and impossible to source independently. Yet, the reality was that these parts were largely shared across other models within the Volkswagen Group. This strategy is not illegal, and rebadging components is common practice across the automotive industry. However, Armstrong's exposure to the scale of the markups and the aggressive control over supply chains raised questions about the ethics of branding, transparency, and consumer trust. By documenting these discrepancies publicly, Armstrong challenged the assumption that luxury pricing automatically reflects bespoke engineering. Instead, he demonstrated that perception and controlled scarcity can be just as powerful as actual innovation in maintaining brand value. This exposure resonated with collectors, enthusiasts, and the general public alike, forcing a reevaluation of factors that justify ultra-high prices in the hypercar market. It underscored the idea that consumers need access to information, transparency, and independent verification to make informed decisions about what they are purchasing, particularly when the amounts involved are in the millions. Armstrong's work illuminated not only the mechanics of the Chiron, but the business strategies and narratives that underpin luxury car markets worldwide. Mat Armstrong's Chiron rebuild did more than expose pricing and supply chain tactics. It fundamentally shifted the culture around hypercar ownership. For decades, vehicles like the Bugatti Chiron have carried a mystique that few dare challenge. Owning a hypercar has been about more than driving. It has been a statement of status, wealth, and access to something considered untouchable. Manufacturers have reinforced this mystique through branding, marketing, and strategic control of information and parts. Buyers have been conditioned to accept the idea that these vehicles are impossible to repair independently, requiring manufacturer oversight to maintain safety and integrity. Armstrong's transparent rebuild directly challenges this notion. By documenting every step of the process, exposing the shared origins of components, and highlighting the feasibility of independent repair, Armstrong empowered a global audience to question long-standing assumptions about the nature of hypercar ownership. The cultural shift is significant. Owners and enthusiasts are beginning to see that exclusivity can be manufactured, controlled, and monetized, rather than inherently existing in the engineering itself. Collectors, previously discouraged from independent repairs or modifications due to fear of losing value or manufacturer disapproval, now have evidence that cars can be rebuilt without compromising authenticity. This transparency fosters a sense of ownership that goes beyond mere possession. It emphasizes understanding, autonomy, and responsibility. Armstrong's work also engages a broader audience beyond traditional hypercar collectors. By sharing the rebuild on YouTube, he made a niche, highly exclusive world accessible to millions, democratizing knowledge that was previously restricted to industry insiders or wealthy owners. The cultural implications extend to younger automotive enthusiasts, engineers, and hobbyists, who now see that even the most prestigious manufacturers are not beyond scrutiny. The Chiron rebuild has thus created a new dialogue about what ownership truly means, encouraging critical thinking, accountability, and curiosity within a space that was once shrouded in secrecy. The unfolding events of the Chiron rebuild placed Bugatti's reputation under intense public scrutiny. Historically, the brand has cultivated an image of perfection, engineering excellence, and unassailable authority in the hypercar market. Every statement, marketing campaign, and pricing decision has reinforced a narrative of untouchable exclusivity. However, Armstrong's findings expose cracks in that carefully maintained image. The public discovery that many Chiron parts are shared across the Volkswagen Group, coupled with the revelation of massive markups, challenged the story Bugatti had told for years. More importantly, the supply chain blockade exposed the company's approach to controlling narratives behind the scenes. Bugatti did not initially respond through public statements or legal channels. Instead, they attempted to suppress the rebuild quietly, pressuring suppliers and leveraging influence to halt progress. This tactic, while effective in theory, relied on the absence of scrutiny. Armstrong's public documentation eliminated that silence, forcing the company's actions into the spotlight. The effect on Bugatti's reputation was immediate. Collectors, enthusiasts, and the automotive press began asking uncomfortable questions about transparency, pricing, and control. The notion that the Chiron is too complex or too dangerous to repair independently lost credibility when the evidence showed otherwise. By showing that the rebuild could proceed with proper expertise and documentation, Armstrong effectively reframed the debate around ownership and control. Bugatti was no longer seen solely